for this Cowboys team, rough year. You couldn't get done. You trade Micah Parsons at the beginning of the year. There were hot moments, and then there were really cold moments. Dak Prescott was like on an MVP candidacy, but your defense was historically bad this year. And so Matt Eberflus was fired, former head coach with the Bears last year and the defensive coordinator this year. So now, some of the personnel you could blame. I think personally after the loss of Micah, we talked about Trayvon Diggs and his ability to cover guys as a corner in the NFL, and he was pretty terrible this year. But I don't think it's just personnel because like Matty Eberflus last year had a bottom 5 defense from a yards perspective with Chicago. This year it was the third worst with Dallas. So I don't think it's just personnel. It was just on him, which is why the Matty Eberflus firing completely makes sense. They are still looking for a defensive coordinator at this point. Jonathan Gannon, former Cardinal head coach, he was fired this year, and others have been interviewed. This is like largely the fix that's needed from a coaching perspective for Dallas. I think you're good with Schottenheimer. Obviously, he's really kind of built actually a pretty good culture, especially in their wins. There, you think about like them, rallying around each other with the passing of Marshawn Nealon earlier this year. They've really established a good culture within the team. Now you could argue the culture's not great with the owner and the GM and whatnot, but he is the reason for that. And that being Jerry, I do think you've got the right guys there and the right guys from a special teams perspective. Cavante Turpin had another great year. Brandon Aubrey was excellent once again. Only 6 misses this year. All of them were from 50 plus. So he was great, 50 and in, and then kicked. His longest kick was only a 62-yarder. He unfortunately has been passed by Cam Little in terms of the biggest leg in the league.
He'll get it back.
But I imagine he'll get it back next year. He is a free agent, though, so they're going to have to prioritize re-signing him. And I'll go in straight in the cap space because of that. Dallas is 40 in the negative for next year, which
unideal.
is unideal. And these are some of their notable cap numbers. We talked about their notable cap numbers coming into this year and it being an interesting question. It's only gotten worse because the contracts have only increased. Dak's number this year is $74 million of a 300
That's
total
insane.
team cap space. He's the highest paid player in the National Football League. He was this year as well. CeeDee Lamb is $38 million. Quinnen Williams and Kenny Clark, the 2 guys you traded for and brought in, are going to be $21 million each. So this makes re-signing guys like Brandon Aubrey really hard, who's probably going to call for like $6 million for a kicker, which is really high, but he deserves every penny. George Pickens, like a re-signing for him is going to be really hard, but I do feel like both of those have to be some kind of priority. Jadeveon Clowney is someone they're talking about internally in Dallas circles that they want him back as well. He led the team in sacks this year with 8.5, which is kind of sad. The loss of Micah Parsons, and now in his 30s, Jadeveon Clowney leads your team in sacks. ESPN has changed their score bug, if I'm not mistaken, 4 times since his big play at South Carolina against Michigan in the Outback Bowl. The Outback Bowl has changed sponsors twice, if I'm not mistaken, as well, since then as well. So him being your leading sacker is not really
unideal
where you want to be. The former first-round pick from the Houston Texans. They want to bring back all 3 of those guys, though, if they have to. They're going to be able to do it. They're going to have to restructure a ton, a la the New Orleans Saints. Guys like Terrence Steele, and then restructuring CeeDee's contract, and Quinnen Williams and Kenny Clark's contract, Dak's contract even, adding void years and just kicking the can down the road seems to be the route into who re-signing George Pickens, re-signing Brandon Aubrey and others. And I do think that's what they're going to prioritize, is something they've always prioritized. They rarely go out of house for players. They always re-sign players or get players through the draft. You very rarely have guys that come in through free agency to Dallas. Maybe it's through trades like Kenny Clark and Quinnen Williams, and George Pickens as well. But very rarely do you have free agent signings that are from another team for Dallas. In terms of their draft, this is where the Micah trade is supposed to help them. And they've got 2 first-round picks this year thanks to said trade. The 12th overall pick and the 20th pick, they'll be a hot topic throughout the night, throughout the weeks and months leading up to the draft here in April. They need defense. Like, that's kind of inarguable. They had the third worst offense from a yards per game perspective. So they're going to need defense guaranteed with one of those picks. They also love to pick offensive linemen. You think of like in the 20s or guys like maybe Francis Mauigoa falls that far, but you have a guy like Caden Proctor, the Penn State guy.
Vega,
that's right. And we'll get his name down. Caleb Lomu is there out of Utah as well. Maybe he's the guy they pick at 20. But 12 through 20, like you do have to go defense. I wouldn't even hate both going defense on those two, especially if you're going to re-sign George Pickens. Excuse me. So where are you guys looking for their 2 picks? Because they're going to be a really hot topic. They were a really hot topic even last year. They surprised a lot of people with picking Tyler Booker out of Alabama, but Tyler Booker had an excellent year. If just like this is the best way to describe how good he was from an offensive lineman perspective. He's already an 88 overall in Madden.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
So he had an excellent year, and he's viewed as one of the best guards in football right now. So, but for this year's draft, how do you guys feel for Dallas 12th and 20?
It's got to be defense.
Yep.
And I think it's going to be defense, just considering that's how Jerry Jones framed the Micah Parsons trade, and he's just a guy that's not going to want to be wrong, right?
Yeah.
So when he said he's going to...
Well, he's already not wrong. Quentin Williams is really good,
True.
he's good.
Yeah.
But, he made this trade to get the cheaper defensive stars. I think he'll go there. I think maybe... I don't know. What you said their first pick is at what?
12.
12.
I think
that'll probably be a best available defender spot.
Yeah.
And then in the 20s, if you haven't already done so, cornerback.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple cornerbacks sitting around 12. Mansur Delane is
True.
right now ranked 14. Jamal McCoy from Tennessee is ranked 12th. And then in the 20s, they would pick with the Green Bay pick at 20. Caden McDonald out of Ohio State.
Yeah, or that.
T.J. Parker, and we'll see how how his combine and everything goes. But yeah, I think secondary and then maybe another best available defender because I feel like
Good point.
You have to, I think, go multiple defenders because of the way the Micah Parsons trade went and getting that first round pick. You can't just be like, oh yeah, we lost one of the best defensive players in the NFL, but don't worry, we're going to draft one guy and that's going to make up for him. It's going to take multiple guys because that's kind of the mentality of, if you think that quality or quantity is better than over quality, then you actually have to get that quantity. You have to take multiple guys, draft multiple guys. So it wouldn't make sense to kind of have that, we're going to go to the cheap, high quantity approach and then not get a high quantity of guys. So I think it's probably, 2 defensive players in the first round.
Yeah, corner is a very interesting one. I do think they might go corner at 12. This has been a franchise that for many years has been kind of linked to picking corners in the draft, and they just never really did. Trayvon Diggs was really their highest pick in terms of
I think they were
corner.
big time linked to Patrick Surtain.
But Pat Surtain was a huge one.
I remember that one being.
Yeah, he was a huge one for them. Christian Gonzalez was someone they talked about a little bit. They didn't really talk about Emmanuel Forbes in that draft. He was a Washington guy. They wanted Washington to make that pick.
Sure.
But this is a team that has been linked big to corners before, and Jerry loves his corners. And they signed Deron Bland to the big extension with the trade of Micah Parsons. So something like Mansour Delane or Gerard McCoy makes a ton of sense at 12 for a potential pick for them. We all agree across the board. Kind of feels like they have to go defense for both picks, and both picks, I think you have to love. One thing about this draft is we're gonna get closer towards it in the next 3 months. We're gonna talk about a ton. There's a lot of defensive players in that first round that are available that can be really big impacts potentially, and then as you get into the second and third round, you start talking more so about receivers and quarterbacks maybe. But that first round, you have a ton of defenders that can be impacts. And at 12, Sonny Styles could fall to them. Maybe
Yeah.
a Peter Woods could fall all the way that far.
Keldrick Faulk.
Keldrick Fault out of Auburn absolutely could fall that far. But you got edge rushers like Cassius Howe and Akeem Ezador and T.J. Parker. And then a good group of DBs and Gerard McCoy and Mansour Delane and even Avion Terrell out of Clemson. So there are a lot of options, which is going to help
Sure.
Jerry look righter in this trade, which is, of course, all he cares about. But it's one of those don't mess it up, because with the way Dak played this year, I don't think this is as much of a talking point, but it very well should be, is like the way they talk about like the Bengals and like, bro, get your stuff together, play some damn defense. Buffalo, with the way they play defense in the playoffs, like quit choking on Josh Allen. Not saying this year was on him, but in other years it has been. Yes, pause on that. The same should be said for Dak Prescott and the Dallas Cowboys with the way they played offense this year, and the way Dak has played 2 of the last 3 years as well. They've kind of failed him a little bit to a defensive perspective, albeit I wouldn't necessarily blame the playoff losses on defense more so than Dak. But to not be in the postseason with an offense that was as great as it was last year, where you have Javonte Williams was a top 10 running back who was out of nowhere. George Pickens he was absolutely incredible last year. He was 3rd in receiving yards, and he's one of my MVPs along with Dak Prescott for this team. He was 3rd in receiving yards with only 93 catches. The 2 above him, JSN and Puka Nacua, had 30 more catches and 36 more catches, and he was only 200 yards behind them in terms of total receiving yards. He had incredible days, incredible explosive days for Dak and the Cowboys. And so if they're able to re-sign him and maybe even Javonte Williams, who was 9th in the league in rush yards with 1,200, and he was 8th in rushing touchdowns. He was you could view him as a Pro Bowl snub, but like there's a lot of great run. He was up there with guys like McCaffrey and guys like Devon Achane and Bijan Robinson, having very similar statistical years. Jake Ferguson was a tight end 3 in fantasy football. He had an excellent year himself. So this offense is elite and had an elite year and was great under Brian Schottenheimer. Can't mess it up defensively next year, because this team, feels like they should win the division. To look towards next year, that's the early realistic goal for them, as well as with the Eagles being a dumpster fire division winner. They're still going to be good, but let's be real. The vibes are not high there.
Sure.
Washington was battered with injuries. How well do they respond? And then the Giants are going to be a really hot pick with John Harbaugh, but it's his first year there. Jackson Dart's not a good quarterback, and they've got to play on that MetLife turf. And so even so, like I've had people tell me about them with Jackson Dart and Cam Scatterbo and Malik Neighbors. Oh, what a dynamic trio that's going to be. That's great. They're going to be probably pretty good for that first 2 weeks. But after that, with Jackson Dart and the way that he protects himself, and Cam Scatterbo and the way that he runs, and Malik Neighbors already coming off an ACL injury, I don't know how consistent that. I think the odds of them being all together at the end of the season would be an underdog if you were betting on it.
Yeah.
So this is a Dallas team that feels like they should be back on top of the division next year, and they're going to have to do that with this offseason, these first-round picks.
I agree with the expectation. It's one thing is always their expectation, whether it's realistic or not. That's just kind of, we talked about it earlier. We're the Cowboys. We're America's team. This is what we do. Like, we win the division. We make the playoffs. We win Super Bowls. That is, kind of fallen to the rear view recently. But it's always their expectation. I think it's a fair expectation rolling into next year, given where the division's at. It's a tall task, but the offense is great. I think it's a realistic task, not a likely task, but it is realistic. There's a chance.
Yeah.